Hi, I'm Marci Kobayashi, and I have another excerpt for you from my book, Finding Yoyu. If you're not familiar with the term Yoyu, it's Japanese, and it means it's used when we talk about having enough wherewithal, whether that's financially, physically, mentally, spiritually. And I'll put a link up above to another video where I talk about how I came to understand the term Yoyu. But I chose the word Yoyu to be part of the title of my memoir because during the time that I'm writing about, I needed a lot of Yoyu to get through it. My mother-in-law needed help moving into a nursing home. My father-in-law, we discovered, had Alzheimer's, and we had him come live with us in Tokyo. And within months of that, my husband discovered he had stage 3 colon cancer. And so learning how to take care of all of them and eventually take care of myself too was required a lot of yo-yo. And I wrote this book a couple of years ago, and it's been sitting on my computer and I haven't moved forward with it. And one of my friends suggested that I start sharing bits of it like this to help inspire me to keep going and to finish editing it. And I want to thank you for following me on this journey with it. There are a few more to go. Today we're at the point after we know that my husband has cancer and he's getting ready for the surgery. Actually, this is the day of the surgery. And part of this, some of you may have heard before because I shared it on Facebook last year. But this puts the story in context, and I want to warn you that there's some parts of it that might seem a little bit gory, and so maybe you'll tune out during those, or maybe you'll listen. So anyway, I'm going to jump in, and so it's a little bit long. Sit back, close your eyes, relax, and enjoy. Here we go. I checked my bag one more time before locking the door and pushing the button for the elevator. I had packed 2 bottles of water, carrot sticks, apple slices, walnuts, 2 rice balls, and a hard-boiled egg. I had a thermos of coffee, too. Oto-san was staying with Akira's brother for a week, so I didn't need to worry about preparing dinner. Akira had already texted me, and he seemed in high spirits. The surgeon had removed 4 polyps the evening before, all benign. The surgery to remove the tumor was happening at noon. I shook my head and grimaced. I still couldn't believe that I passed out watching them remove Akira's polyps the day before. The surgeon had probably been joking when he asked if I wanted to watch. Ever curious, I had eagerly accepted his offer, and the nurse had pointed out a chair just inside the room where I could sit and watch. Akira was on his side in front of me, and I watched the monitor in fascination as the endoscope went deeper and deeper into him. Leaning over, the surgeon adjusted the monitor so Akira could see it too. He pointed out the tumor that he would remove the next day during the main surgery. My eyes were glued to the monitor, and one by one, I watched the surgeon tie off the polyps, and then suddenly everything was a loud and confusing mess of dark colors and people calling my name. I was on the floor and couldn't figure out why. Then, as my vision cleared, I could see Akira up on the table, and I realized I must have passed out, falling from my chair to the floor. The nurse helped me up and out of the room into a bed just outside where she started checking my blood pressure. I was fine, notwithstanding my embarrassment. I knew Akira would never let me forget it, and he immediately started teasing me. Fortunately, my mom had been kinder when I checked in with her before leaving home. She suggested that in my fascination I had probably forgotten to breathe. As I walked from the train station to the hospital, I took several deep breaths. There was a little park next to the hospital, and I waved at the trees. I took one more deep breath and walked into the hospital. I was grateful we had chosen a hospital relatively close to home. Akira had opted to stay in a 4-person room to save on cost. The hospital had recently been renovated, so everything was clean, of course, and modern. There were 2 beds on either side of the room. Each person had their own floor-to-ceiling cabinet with shelves, drawers, a TV, and a mini refrigerator. The beds were separated by a floor-to-ceiling curtain, so even with 4 people, it felt private. The only major disadvantage was that the restroom was around the corner next to his room, not in it. Only 2 to 3 extra steps away, and not a big deal. When I got to Akira's room, he was in the restroom, or rather just coming out. He was already hooked up to an IV in preparation for the surgery, and at first I thought that is why he had called the nurse. I quickly learned it was because they were monitoring his bowel movements since they had removed the 4 polyps the night before. The nurse had told us to expect a little blood, but I peeked around Akira and saw that the toilet bowl was full. Akira said that it was his second time. It appeared like too much blood, but neither of us had had polyps removed, so we had no idea. The nurse told us that it was more blood than usual and that she would report it to the surgeon just in case. It bothered me, but I figured it was minor compared to what he would endure later during the main surgery. Besides, the nurse was going to inform the surgeon. I asked her about it again after Akira made another trip around the corner to the restroom. She said she had told the surgeon, so I decided not to worry. The morning passed quickly, and before I knew it, I was in the tiny room reserved for family members who are waiting for their loved ones to get out of surgery. I remember thinking how strange it was that I was all alone. Why hadn't I asked anyone to be with me while Akira was in surgery? It never occurred to me. My mind had been pretty scattered, so someone may have offered without me realizing it. It was so quiet now, I didn't know what to do. I remember wondering how Akira felt when I was having hip surgery, or how my sister felt waiting alone while my mom had leg surgery. I had my computer with me thinking I might try and work. I had packed plenty of food so I wouldn't have to leave the room. I was afraid if I went out, I might miss something. I spent some time texting back and forth with family members. I remember reading a little, but mostly I just sat there waiting. Finally, the nurse came in to say that the surgery was over and the surgeon wanted to see me. I grabbed my phone and left everything else in the room. That worried me a bit. Would they lock the door? Would my computer be okay? I didn't want to make the surgeon wait and hurried after the nurse. In the small room just outside of surgery, the surgeon was already sitting at a little table facing the door. I sat down across from him, and the nurse sat in a chair in the corner of the room, just behind the doctor, taking notes. I noticed a tray covered with a cloth on the table and a whiteboard on the wall next to us. The surgeon said that they were able to remove the tumor and one of the lymph nodes, which was enlarged. He sketched out a diagram on the whiteboard. He went on to explain in detail what he removed and where it had been in relation to everything else. He talked a lot about what he did to preserve the other lymph nodes and seemed pleased with his work. Evidently, other surgeons automatically remove the lymph nodes, but he believed it was better to keep as many as possible. He sounded positive, and I was feeling good. I was nervous and excited, and probably smiling too much. Finally, the surgeon asked if I wanted to see what he had removed, the bit of the intestine where the tumor was embedded. Of course, being a curious Gemini and especially intrigued with anything to do with the body, I said yes. It was gross and fascinating at the same time. I have a super sensitive nose and was afraid it might have some odor, so I caught myself holding my breath. Then I remembered my mom's comment and remembered to breathe. I did not want a repeat of the day before. I had already started to feel lightheaded, so I concentrated on taking deep breaths, full breaths, in and out. I asked if I could take a picture. I knew my brother-in-law would quiz me about everything later, and I wanted to be able to perform. Akira took pictures of everything he could when I had surgery. Eventually, he would want to see pictures too. The surgeon kindly held it up for me and turned it over so I could get several photos. He pointed out which part was the tumor and where the lymph node was. Then the surgeon asked if I wanted to touch it. Did I really want to touch the tumor? I didn't know it was allowed, and part of me was curious. I didn't have a need to feel it, but the surgeon had asked in a sort of arrogant way as if he knew I would probably say no, remembering how I'd passed out the day before. I was not going to let him think I was a wuss. Without thinking further, I said yes. He was surprised, and so was the nurse. They pulled out a pair of gloves for me, and I held that bit of flesh that had been inside my husband, was a part of my husband only a short time ago. The surgeon then admitted that he was surprised and that he didn't expect me to say yes. We all left, and I felt my chin lift a little. I felt like I had passed some kind of test, or at the very least redeemed myself. Akira never did ask to see the photos. He knows I have them, and that is enough. Strangely, no one else wants to see them either. They are on my phone, and sometimes I think of deleting them. After talking with the surgeon, I gathered my things, and Akira was moved to a room in ICU where he was to stay for the night. He woke up several times throughout throughout the afternoon, and I took a few more pictures of him. He had done the same thing to me when I had my hip replaced, so I wanted to get even. I stayed until after visiting hours were over before finally heading home. By that time, I had no Yoyu. I was exhausted. I was so depleted that I barely remember walking from the hospital to the station or getting on the train. However, I vividly remember the final leg, the walk from my station to home. I don't remember why I chose to walk instead of taking a taxi. Maybe habit, or maybe I knew I couldn't face the taxi driver and give him directions without crying. I was so exhausted that even putting one foot in front of the other was an effort. It was raining, and I didn't have an umbrella. I stood in front of the station and willed myself to keep going. My brain was foggy, and I fought back tears. I was shaking. I wasn't worried. The surgery had been successful, yet all I wanted to do was curl up in a ball on the sidewalk and cry. I was depleted. I had no Yoyu. A small part of me was fascinated, so this is what it felt like. I had heard people talk about exhaustion. I had seen people act it out in movies. I always thought it was over-dramatized. Now I knew it wasn't. I couldn't imagine how I was going to make it home. For a second, I thought about going back over to the taxis. I could see them, but the effort was too great. How was I ever going to make it home? I thought about crumpling down on the ground. It would feel so good. People were streaming by me on either side, going to and from the station. The police box was off to the left. If I crumpled down here, I would have to explain. That would take more energy. So I took another step forward instead. Then I saw a tree on my right, a beacon of strength standing tall and mostly ignored amidst all of the people, busy cars, buses, and neon lights. "Chotto chodai," I silently begged. "Please share a little with me." I had been navigating the hospital scene all day in Japanese, so naturally the Japanese came out first. It didn't matter. The tree would know what I needed, whether I spoke Japanese or English. I couldn't think of what to say in English anyway. "Chotto chodai." Please share a little. Please spare a little for me. Not a lot. Not everything. Just a little, please. Then I looked ahead to the next bit of green I could find. There was a pot of flowers in front of a shop. "Chotto chodai." I asked for the flowers to share a little energy with me. I saw another tree. "Chotto chodai." Spare a little, please. I saw a dandelion growing in the crack in the cement between two buildings. "Chotto chodai." Share a little, please. I kept walking. I saw some moss on the curb. "Chotto chodai." Spare a little, please. The tears streamed down my face. I hoped no one was looking at me. I wasn't embarrassed. I was worried about the effort of explaining why I was crying. I saw another tree. "Chotto chodai." Share a little, please. I reached the next intersection. I saw a young, thin tree, itself probably struggling to survive alongside the busy street. "Chotto chodai." Spare a little, please. I vowed I would return the favor someday. I walked with one tree, one bush, one weed in front of the other until I reached home. I made it, thanks to my new friends along the way. I never realized how much green was alive in my city. I entered my home with more energy and peace than when I had left the hospital. I've walked the same route to and from the station hundreds of times since then. Many of the trees that helped me home that day still stand. I thank them one by one as I walk. I admit I don't always remember to share, so some days I make it a point to retrace my steps. Then I share with everything I can find. I share with the trees, the flowers, the weeds, the ants, the birds, the rocks, and even some of the people. I learned that day that Source is always present. There was always help for me when I need it. I have only to ask. And asking for help and receiving it did not mean I was depleting another. A little here, a little there. It all adds up. Okay. And that's all for today. The day of Akira's surgery back in 2015, when I think I needed more help than he did in a way. Anyway, I'll be back again next week for the next excerpt and what happens later with Akira after a few days after the surgery. So thank you again for sticking with me and helping me get this book out there into the world. And please subscribe. And if you know anybody else who would like to, who would benefit from the story, let them know. Please share. All right. Thanks again, and I'll be back next week.